The baby gorilla came into the world under a heavy sky and an even heavier silence. Its fur, pure white like mountain snow, glowed faintly against the deep greens of the acacia-dotted African savanna. At first, there was only confusion, then fear. The mother gorilla, still trembling from the labor, gazed down in disbelief at the pale creature nestled against her chest. Around her, the troop of gorillas howled and backed away, their cries echoing through the trees like thunder rolling across the plains. In a world where survival depended on blending in, this newborn was a beacon, a fragile flare against the camouflage of the wild. The silverback, the troop's leader and father of the infant, turned away without a sound. His massive frame was a wall of denial. To him, the strange pale infant represented weakness, danger, and disruption. The others followed his example, leaving the mother and her white-furred newborn isolated beneath the acacia's spreading branches. For hours, the mother sat in that isolation, her instincts colliding in painful conflict. Every part of her being urged her to protect her child. Yet every glance from her own family pierced her with rejection. She nuzzled the infant gently, her dark fingers brushing the soft white fur that glowed faintly in the filtered light. It let out a thin, uncertain cry. She looked toward her troop, her lifelong safety, and saw only fear staring back, eyeing the brutal simplicity of nature. Difference was not beauty. It was vulnerability. Over the next few days, the tension grew unbearable. The white infant's scent marked the troop's path, drawing the attention of predators. Every time a leopard's call sounded from the tall grass, the troop blamed her. The rejection turned to aggression, low grunts of warning, flashes of bared teeth. Finally, one evening as the light faded to gold, the mother made the choice that would change everything. She left. Under the cover of a pale dawn, she carried the fragile white baby against her chest and moved silently through the grasslands. She didn't look back. Behind her lay safety, hierarchy, and belonging. Ahead of her lay uncertainty and danger. But love, raw, instinctive, and desperate, gave her strength. Hours later, she reached the edge of the wilderness, where the green world met the human one. There stood a small wooden cabin, rough but sturdy, its walls weathered by sun and dust. Smoke curled faintly from a tin chimney. Inside lived Ranger Elias, a man who had spent half his life protecting the creatures that others sought to exploit. When he heard the low rustle outside his door, he assumed it was the wind. But then came a soft, throaty sound, not a threat, but a plea. He opened the wooden latch slowly. The sight that met him froze his breath. Before him stood the Great Mother. Gorilla, her body trembling with exhaustion, her eyes heavy with sorrow. In one massive hand, she cradled a tiny, white-furred baby, its color so vivid it seemed to shine. For a moment, man and beast stared at each other, time suspended between species. Then, to his astonishment, the gorilla lowered her head and extended her arm, pushing the infant gently toward him. Elias's hand hovered midair, his instincts torn between fear and awe. The mother's gesture was unmistakable. It was surrender, but not of defeat, of trust. A single tear slid down the gorilla's cheek, cutting through the dust on her face. It was a silent, wordless message. Protect what I cannot. The ranger took the small creature into his arms, and the mother released it with heartbreaking tenderness. For one fleeting moment, she lingered, her breath warm, her gaze soft, and then she turned back into the wilderness. Her figure disappeared among the trees, leaving Elias alone with a miracle. Inside the dim cabin, the ranger laid the infant on a folded blanket. It was impossibly small, no heavier than a human newborn, its eyes closed, its fur gleaming like frost. He whispered, "You're safe now," though he wasn't sure he believed it. He named the baby Moonbeam for its luminous coat. Days blurred into nights. The cabin became a nursery, its sparse furnishings repurposed into a fragile ecosystem of survival. Elias built makeshift incubators using heated bottles, learned to mix milk from powdered nutrients, and shielded the room with canvas to block the harsh African sunlight. Moonbeam's skin was sensitive, its eyes could not bear direct glare. Every few hours, Elias fed it with a dropper, careful to keep its body warm against his chest. He slept on the wooden floor, the baby pressed against his heartbeat, wrapped in his flannel shirt. Fatigue clawed at him constantly, but so did wonder. He watched the small creature curl its fingers around his thumb, cling to him after feeding, and rumble softly in contentment. Each sound was a reminder of the impossible moment at his door, a moment of cross-species trust that no one would ever believe without seeing. Yet for all the tenderness, there was an unspoken weight pressing down on Elias's conscience. He was keeping alive what nature had rejected. Was he saving the creature, or defying the laws that kept the wild in balance? Some nights he sat, awake long after Moonbeam had fallen asleep, staring at the trembling lamplight, asking himself if compassion could exist without consequence. Weeks passed. The baby gorilla gained strength, crawling first, then learning to grasp small branches. It followed Elias clumsily across the cabin floor, tugging at his boots and blinking up with luminous eyes that reflected firelight like polished ivory. When it grew restless, Elias would carry it outside at dusk to breathe the cooler air. He'd watch the moonlight turn its fur to silver and whisper, "You belong out there, not with me." He knew that moment would come. Months later, when Moonbeam could walk and forage on its own, the decision Elias dreaded arrived. The jungle was calling, and the white-furred juvenile no longer belonged in a man-made world. Its muscles were strong now, its instincts sharper. But Elias's heart was heavy with the knowledge that returning it might mean losing it forever. Early one morning, he loaded the young gorilla into a carrier and drove deep into the reserve, to the same region where the mother's troop was last seen. He parked at the clearing's edge and stepped into the grass. The troop was there, dark, forms moving through the foliage, led by the same silverback who had once rejected the albino infant. Elias released Moonbeam near the boundary and stepped back. The white figure stood motionless for a moment, scanning the familiar landscape. Then it took a few hesitant steps forward, small hands brushing the grass. The other gorillas noticed instantly. Their movement stopped, heads turned, but there was no welcoming chorus. No approach, only silence. The silverback looked once and turned away. The others followed, returning to their foraging. The white juvenile, so bright against the green world, stood alone. Elias's chest tightened. He'd prepared for aggression, not this, cold indifference. It was worse than rejection. It was invisibility. Then a low rumble cut through the still air. The mother gorilla broke from the group. She moved with astonishing speed and determination, crossing the clearing despite the troop's warning grunts. When she reached her child, she didn't hesitate. She wrapped her massive arms around it, pulling it close in a fierce, trembling embrace. A deep, resonant cry rose from her chest, half sob, half song. Elias understood instantly. Joy. The troop watched. No one intervened. The mother refused to release her child, grooming its white fur gently, whispering reassurance in a language only they shared. Elias felt tears prick his own eyes. He had saved a life, but it was this reunion, this moment of pure maternal defiance, that completed the miracle. Still, nature was not softened so easily. Days passed. Elias returned often, watching from a hidden vantage point. The white juvenile followed its mother closely, but the rest of the troop kept their distance. The wall of difference held firm. Moonbeam was tolerated but not embraced. Its brightness, its scent, marked it as an outsider. Each evening, Elias returned to the cabin torn between pride and despair. He'd given the baby gorilla back to its world, but that world had not yet learned acceptance. Then, one clear morning, everything changed. He found the troop gathered quietly in the clearing, the mother seated in the center, her arms around Moonbeam. The others were close, too close to be coincidence. The silverback sat only a few meters away, eating calmly. The usual tension was gone. The bright, white figure of Moonbeam was no longer at the edge of the group, but within it, surrounded by dark, protective bodies. The mother groomed her child's fur, while another female groomed hers in turn, linking them through touch and scent. It was subtle, almost unremarkable to an untrained eye, but Elias understood its meaning instantly. The barrier had broken. The troop had accepted the anomaly. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. It was the slow surrender of fear to something stronger, connection. The mother's unwavering love had rewritten the code of the wild, forcing the troop to adapt rather than reject. Elias stepped back quietly, tears blurring his vision. The white gorilla, once an outcast marked for death, had become a living emblem of change. He watched the group disappear into the forest shadows, a constellation of dark forms moving around one glowing center. Later that evening, as the sun set behind the acacia trees, Elias sat on his cabin porch and wrote in his field journal. Sometimes evolution isn't written in bones or genes. Sometimes it begins with the courage to love what's different. He looked toward the horizon where the troop had vanished and whispered, "Thank you, Moonbeam." The wind carried his words through the grass, soft, fleeting, but reeled in the quiet that followed. One truth stood unshakable. The greatest barrier in the wild, and in ourselves, has never been difference. It has always been the fear of difference. And love, unyielding and unafraid, is the only force powerful enough to change it.